Hello, everyone. We're so glad that you're joining us today for this special event. My name is Taylor Williams, and I'll be the host for today's storytelling. I'm the creative director of Guts and Glory GNV, a live storytelling organization here in Gainesville, Florida. We're so fortunate to have these storytellers today being willing to use their voices and share their stories with us about themselves and about their family and about our community. Evelyn Fox, Ariel Lane, and Warren Lee will be sharing with you today. We're so grateful for Heartwood, who has given us a beautiful space to share these stories, and the generous financial support of Infotech here in Gainesville. During these times in COVID and so much political and societal pain, coming together in community can be challenging in different ways. But this show is an example of coming together in honor of the past, the present, and our future. We need these sort of gatherings more than ever right now. I hope that you will bear witness to these stories with us with an open heart and mind. I hope that you will carve out some sacred space to allow these stories to reach you wherever you are, and that you might feel motivated to listen, be more empathic, understand the past more deeply, take action. To start off our show, I would like to introduce Commissioner Chestnut, who has been a driving force behind the committee that is ultimately producing this show. He will tell you more about the purpose and the goals of the fullness of the Alachua County Remembrance Project. Thank you for being with us for the first part of this beautiful project that will continue later in the spring.
Thank you for joining us today. Today's storytelling event is produced by the Alachua County Community Remembrance Project and with the generous financial sponsorship of Infotech. The Alachua County Community Remembrance Project is a community group that was established in January 2019, and we work in partnership with the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. From the late 1800s until the 1950s, Florida had the highest per capita lynching rate in the United States, and Alachua County ranked at the top of the list. Therefore, our goal is truth and reconciliation. We seek to educate our community about this county's history of lynching and racial terrorism stemming from the Jim Crowe era. We resolve to recognize and honor the victims of racial terror, recognizing the legacy of that era, and recognizing the results of systemic racism and racial disparity that still plagues our community today. Bringing truth and reconciliation to fruition through educational events such as this, placing historical markers, hosting ceremonial affairs to honor lynching victims, collecting soil from lynching sites to preserve history, and organizing high school essay contests for our young so they too learn and can impart knowledge about our truth and our history. There were 48 known victims of lynching here in Alachua County during the Jim Crowe era. Today, 3 courageous members of our community will tell how their lives were directly impacted by this history. Hearing their stories makes this history more real, and its effect on us today are truly clear. Thank you for joining us.
First, we have Ariel Lane. She's a mom, an overnight activist, and founder of March for Our Freedom, a local nonprofit organization born out of the George Floyd tragedy.
I was newly settled into Gainesville the day before the Trayvon Martin verdict on July 13, 2013. Just days before Prince George of Cambridge, son of William and Kate, was shown off to the world on July 22nd. The defeat of what it's like to be Black in America versus the ease and acceptance of what it means to be royalty abroad will always stick with me. After the verdict, I tried to go on with normal life, being a stay-at-home mom to a 1-year-old and keeping my daily sanity. Both felt like insurmountable tasks given the climate in America. A cashier at our local Target happened to be chatting with the guest in front of me about the verdict. I didn't hear what they were saying, and honestly, I wanted to just get my milk and leave. She must have sensed my discomfort because her next comment seemed to come across with an air of sympathy. "Don't worry, that won't ever happen to your little one," she said to me and my 1-year-old biracial son. "No one would ever guess he's Black." There it was. The dichotomy of white beauty and the proverbial Black beast. She had just suggested that my son could pass, and I was shocked. I had just arrived home from a shopping trip to Publix when I heard the news of Eric Garner's death in July 2014. I can't breathe. The words played in my head over and over. Mike Brown's news came in August of 2014, another Black man dead. I am a city of Baltimore native. News of the death of Freddie Gray came in April 2015. I watched the anguish of my city boil to the surface and explode into fires and destruction that only someone living under the iron fist of constant racism could ever begin to understand. I understood the rage. I was enraged. Sandra Bland, July 13th, 2015. 3 days after her arrest during a traffic stop and harassment from an officer because she wouldn't extinguish her cigarette, she was found hanging lifeless in her cell. I watched Facebook Live footage of a girlfriend begging her boyfriend to keep breathing after a police officer had just shot him at point-blank range on July 6, 2015. This was Philando Castillo. His 4-year-old employed her daddy from the backseat to just hold on so that they could get ice cream later. Ahmaud Arbery, he was jogging on February 23, 2020. That's it, a common exercise. George Floyd, May 25, 2020. Another public lynching for all the world to see and none of the world to give a shit about. And my final straw. I have watched all of these events, hundreds, maybe thousands of deaths and microaggressions towards Black people. Too many to count. My exhaustion was palpable. When I was asked to take part in this event, I'll be honest, I immediately began to feel bile rise in the back of my throat. The feeling was familiar. The putrid discomfort of the process of reliving our tarnished pasts. I hated having to, yet again, conjure the focus it takes to hold on to the vision of the quote-unquote prize on which I was supposed to keep my eyes, and finding the ability to once again forget and repress the recurrent feeling of why do you hate us this much, while simultaneously doing the right thing and participating for the culture. In that moment, I felt the pain of every event rush back. My pain, our pain. I wished I hadn't taken the call. Remember, reckon, and reflect. I have spent so much of my time attempting to forget and not consider our history, our recent histories. I felt sick at the thought of re-triggering myself enough to even think of these things and potentially make peace with my own desire for vengeance. But here I stand. Being Black in America is a funny thing. The mixture of emotions all the time. It's beautiful and exhausting. And that was no different on the morning of May 27th for me. Over the years, I think I have developed a keen ability to gloss over the public lynchings of Black Americans. Not because I don't care, but because my emotions would enter into a catatonic state that was always hard to shake. Even though Mr. Floyd was murdered on May 25th, the news didn't settle in for me until the morning of the 27th. My little boy was fresh out of virtual school for the summer, and we were just carrying on about our day, breakfast, playtime, the regular stuff. I stepped out of the room to grab something, and when I got back, my son, Liam, looked at me and asked me the most heart-wrenching question I had ever heard. I hadn't realized the news had been droning in the background, and Liam happened to catch the top story of the hour, the murder of George Floyd. He looked at me with the biggest green eyes I had ever seen and said, "Mom, will this happen to you? Will this happen to Mr. Sean?" Mr. Sean is my partner, a Black man, and Liam loves us both very much. Parenting in this context is interesting. We spend the formative years of our child's lives attempting to protect them from the real world. And somewhere around their senior year, we bombard them with, it's time for you to grow up and take care of yourself. It's funny, because how? We've been shielding and sheltering them for far too long. I opened the fridge, shed a few quick tears in its coolness, and then I heard myself lie. No, I said, we're safe. But I had no real idea if we were actually safe in today's America. He heard me lie too. That's the moment when everything changed for me. I felt rage like I never had. Rage and sadness mixed with the unmistakable feeling and taste of bile in the back of my throat again. Another street lynching of a Black man, perfect for the 6 p.m. news and shares on Instagram, again. Those feelings culminated into a desperate need to make a plan, but a plan to do what? I didn't know exactly. But I started realizing just how much hopelessness can breed action. I went upstairs to take a shower and think, but before I stepped in, I got the bright idea to send a Facebook message to the mayor of Gainesville, Lauren Poe. Good morning. I am writing because I am curious if there are any marches, protests, or demonstrations occurring in Gainesville in light of George Floyd's killing. Thank you, Ariel Lane. I'm not sure what I expected. I'm not sure that I even expected much at all. I wasn't even sure why I thought he'd be the proper contact. Not that I know of, was his response. That's it. And while I now have gotten to know and like our mayor, those 5 words sent me into a rage and a subsequent planning tailspin. I showered, made a few calls to people I thought could help the most, stared at my cup of coffee and wondered how to stop my anger. Then I made a Facebook group. I thought to myself, I'm just going to invite my closest friends, just the 8 that I've been hanging with during quarantine. Maybe they'll invite someone and we'll end up with 50 people tops. We'll make signs, we'll march, and then we'll go home and make sandwiches and go on wondering how we can fix the problems. Over the next few hours, hundreds of people joined the group. By that evening, Wednesday night, there were 500 members. By Thursday morning, there were almost 1,000 people. The next few days were a blur. Interview after interview, call after call, panic attacks, one right after the other. I began to be contacted by friends, family, city officials, and even the mayor about what was potentially about to happen in the coming days. I spent most of my time agonizing over a man's final words, "I can't breathe." I spent nights awake at the thought that this man cried out for his mom before his death. No amount of people marching could bring him back, in my mind. And there was the bile again. I was contacted by the city commissioner. We were, after all, running a Facebook page with upwards of 1,000 people in it who were planning to march with or without a permit. We didn't have one. With no real supervision and no real plan. That's how my life was looking. I took the call from Gail Johnson, the city commissioner, and she was able to talk some sense into me like no one had in the hours before. The conversation went like this. Gail, hey Ariel, I know you're insanely busy, but I just need to talk to you for 5 minutes, that's it. Me, secretly rolling my eyes because I didn't know what the hell I was doing and I was too anxious to listen like a normal person. Thanks for calling me, Gail. Gail, Ariel, we have to come up with a plan. It's looking like there's going to be over 1,000 people at your march. Me, no, I don't think so. Boy, was I wrong. Gail, no permits are being given out right now for public gathering due to COVID, but I'm going to contact the Gainesville Police Department to set up barricades and escort you guys. The barricades will allow you to walk in the street in the interest of public health and safety. We originally planned to walk on the sidewalk because we weren't permitted to be in the roads, but honestly, how the heck was I going to keep all those people on a sidewalk? Me, literally in shock. Gail, do we actually need all of those measures? Gail, yes, and I'll get back to you if there's anything else I need from you. And she proceeds to hang up and work some unforeseen magic immediately. Me, I was speechless, but there I stood. Friday was spent in a frenzy of planning. My friends and my partner rallied around me to help with all of the details. On the evening before the march, my friends who had become my team met at my house to go over last-minute details and to just take a deep breath. I didn't do that last part. Atlanta was burning. There were protests in Portland. It was all happening in real time. I hadn't eaten, I hadn't slept. All I did was wonder what it was all for. I physically shook like a leaf, a very fragile and cute leaf. I woke up the next morning full of nerves, but with a renewed sense of responsibility to march for a man who should still have been alive. The 20-minute ride to the meeting site was long and quiet. I still had so many doubts, but once we parked and walked to Depot Park, I was immediately overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. We immediately launched into go mode, media interviews, handing out signs, making sure people were hydrated and ready to walk on that very hot day and gearing to begin our march. As I watched hundreds of people walk over that big hill, I began to feel that bile rising again. In my head, all I could think was, we have been being lynched for a lot of years, a lot. Where were you people before? Why the urgency now? It pissed me off a little. So much support this time, but what about the hundreds of times before? What about the bloodshed that maybe could have been avoided if you had helped us gain our voices years ago? I tamped down the feeling and replaced it mostly with adrenaline and anticipation, and we marched. It's still hard to explain the feeling of thousands of voices chanting in unison behind you. It's hard to articulate the feeling of marching for someone you don't even know, someone who can never be brought back. The march was a huge success, one that people got energy from to do more, but we're still fighting. Cities are still burning, men and women are still dying. I want to leave you all with what I wrote on social media the night before the march. I want to say it again because it still rings true about me, about our community, about the work we have to do. I'll be honest, y'all. I am shaking like a leaf. Really, I can't tell if it's from fear, anticipation, readiness, gratitude, anxiety, or if it's all of those things rolled up into one at the same exact time. All I know is that we are standing on the edge of something. Our tiny contribution to the Gainesville community has placed us on a precipice that I will never, in my lifetime, be able to articulate. Things are changing. Things are pivoting in our community. I can feel it. I hope my small contribution brings even one moment of hope to the Floyd family. I hope this march will let just one Black little boy or girl know that they matter. I hope I can settle my stomach enough to stand strong and say and do the hard things. I hope I make y'all proud. But most of all, I hope you guys continue to stand with me in this fight. This is just the beginning.
Next, we have Evelyn Fox. Evelyn was born in Riceboro, Georgia. She attended her first NAACP meeting when she was just a fifth grader, foreshadowing her lifelong commitment to civil rights. Evelyn moved to Gainesville 22 years ago, and one of her first acts was to join the local chapter of NAACP. She had a career in insurance, however, her vocation has always been working for human rights. She has served as president of the Alachua NAACP since 2010, and she has served on many boards and commissions, including the Cotton Club, Gainesville Housing Authority, Girls Place, Digital Divide Committee, Gainesville Parks and Recreation Board, MLK Commission, and she is an active member of Dayspring Missionary Baptist Church. She has received much recognition for her work and received many awards, including the Santa Fe College Woman of Distinction, Alachua County Democrat of the Year, Unsung Hero Award, and others. She is married to George Fox and has 5 children. A local hero and a tireless fighter for human rights, we welcome Evelyn Fox.
In 2018, my friend Jackie Davis and a group from her church, the United Church of Gainesville, and the Alachua County branch of the NAACP organized a trip to visit the Lynching Memorial and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. This facility was opened April 26, 2018. It's the nation's first memorial dedicated to the legacy of enslaved Black people who were terrorized and humiliated by a host of atrocities. Traveling with 50 enthusiastic friends and associates, including my daughters, Carla and I, the bus ride up to Montgomery was fun. We really had fun just getting to meet other people from other backgrounds, and we had a wonderful time. The first night we spent unwinding and enjoying the unique fellowship. Some came for support, some came to bear witness, some came to be educated, but we all came to honor those who were lost, murdered, as we each enter an era of truth-telling. The next morning, we visited the museum. Our mood was sombered. I didn't know what to expect because I've never been there before. I heard from friends what it was all about, but I had the honor of witnessing it firsthand. In the museum, arranged in negroes, were soul samples from all over the South and beyond, where each victim was lynched. Earth from every site was collected in a glass jar, the glass being the window into the past. Georgia's red clay, bits of puff sand and gray clay from the low country, Florida's sand, loomy sands from the forest, and dozens of clumps of the earth from hilltops to gullies are represented. The land waited patiently for centuries to finally share its account of racism, of the racism atrocities. It took my breath away. After lunch, we made our way to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. I was astounded at what I saw. As we walked into the memorial, the lynching memorial, there were slabs hanging up from the walls with every person that was lynched, the county and the state from which it happened. It was a sad day. I became kind of anxious because I wanted to go to Georgia and look for the county from which I was born, which is Liberty County, which is off of coastal Georgia. I looked at all the slabs, and finally, I came to the slab that said Liberty County, Georgia. It was like it was indescribable. When I finally got to my county, Liberty County, there were only 3 names on the slab. And one of those names were my great, great, grandfather, Benjamin Howard, who we call Ben Howard. On the slab was the name of Benjamin Howard, lynched August 23rd, 1892. I was devastated. Everything that I heard about Ben's lynching was true. I cried uncontrollably. My daughters consoled me, but they were stunned by the history just as I was. Knowing about death is one thing, but seeing it etched in stone is another. And knowing it was a lynching, it was the worst thing imaginable. I often heard stories from my elders about Ben Howard lynching. There was never anything but talk, no graveside, very few details, nothing but stories to us as kids. Even so, as children, we were scary to know that something like this could happen. More than a century later, lynching still did its dirty work, keeping people submissively in fear. What I pieced together about the lynching of Ben Howard was that he and his son William was traveling back to the farm with a bag of winter seeds in the back of a horse-drawn carriage. The sun was going down, they said, and some white men, apparently intoxicated, was heading their way. They sped past and suddenly stopped and turned around. Ben knew trouble was coming. He quickly put William on the horse, cut the traces of the hornet, and in a firm voice said, "Get out of here. Ride and don't look back. Don't you look back." He slapped the rump of the horse and it took off. William, his son, never looked back. I believe the event left William a crushed man. My memories of William, whom we call Papa, are that he was a tall, slender-built man with beautiful black complexion. Never in my lifetime did I ever see him laugh or smile. He was serious, a man of few words, and deeply sad. He wore a long black coat in the winter. I assume it could have represented a mourning cloak. After all of these years, I finally understand. He lost his father under terrifying circumstances. What if his father hadn't thought fast and got him out of there? He was the last one in our family to see Ben alive. It was a tremendous burden. He carried that burden to his grave, dying in his early 90s. In 2016, the day after the presidential election, I began getting phone calls from a strange voice that was very, very frightening, that sounded threatening to me. He would call and ask questions like, "What do you think about our president? What you gonna do now that we have a new president?" I said, "Well, he's my president as well, and I will respect him and love him like I'm supposed to do." So the calls continued through 2017. Then on July 3rd, 2017, my walking partner, Meg, and I were about to take our morning walk. I looked across the yard and saw something suspicious. I asked Meg, "What is that?" She went over to take a look. Then, remembering the strange calls, I yelled, "Don't touch it." Who knows what might be in an anthrax, animal carcass, or even something worse. We carefully scrolled with my walking stick, opened it up, and there lay a Confederate flag on my front lawn. You can't imagine how I felt. I started crying, and I was saying, "What is this? Who did this?" Well, I called the police that morning, and the federal marshals got involved this time because the case was qualified as a hate crime. Our assumption was the caller and the flag placer was one and the same. I prayed the man would be apprehended, but police work often moves slowly. I waited and worried from July until October. Officials finally found him about a half mile from my house. He was arrested and jailed locally. I went to court. I had a chance to see this man face to face. The judge asked me, "What do you think should happen to him?" I replied, "Well, we're all God's children. I forgive you. I love you. But why did you do this?" He replied, "I was drinking a lot back then." And then after we walked out of the courtroom, it came to my attention that this man did not even apologize to me. He never told me he was sorry. From Gainesville, he went to Key West to face other charges. Recently, I was notified that he's out again and lives in fear. Sometimes I wake up anxious and I think about what happened to my great-great-grandfather and what happened to me and others in this modern age with all the hatred and bigotry swirling around us. We have come a long way, but we have a long way to go. I am heartened by organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative and the Alachua County Community Remembrance Project. We will finally reveal the history of racial terrorism in this country and bring light to the dark past so that we can begin to heal from our wounds. I am honored my family story can be added to many family memorials of truth. May that move us to a peaceful reconciliation and closure to the horrors holding our nation people of color hostage.
Our last storyteller is Mr. Warren Lee. He's the great-grandson of Jim and Julia Dennis. He was born and raised in the Jonesville-Newberry area and went to Newberry High, Florida State University, and is currently working on an MBA to pursue a JD later. Here's Warren Lee.
So, this is a storytelling that features the untimely loss of my descendants, Jim Dennis, Bert and Mary Dennis. This story takes place over 100 years ago in my hometown of Jonesville, Florida, where I was born in 1966. My grandmother, Eunice Myers, now 101 years old, is the daughter of Julia Dennis, whom was the wife of Jim Dennis. Bert and Mary Dennis are the brothers and sisters of Jim Dennis. In August of 1916, the dynamics of the Dennis family would change forever. Our lineage would come to an abrupt halt, as many around the country would get the news that something had happened in Jonesville, Newberry, Florida. A constable by the name of Mr. Wynn had been shot and killed. The reason Mr. Wynn was shot and killed, because Mr. Wynn attempted to issue a search warrant on Mr. Boise Long at 2 a.m. in the morning. And as we know, at 2 a.m. in the morning, when somebody's lurking around your house, there's nothing good coming out of that. Mr. Boise Long shot Mr. Wynn and killed him. He also shot the pharmacist that was with him, only to injure him. Later that morning, the sheriff got wind of it, and a posse was formed. Mr. Boise Long escaped into the night. For 2 days, the posse searched for him. However, on August 19th, Boise Long was captured and jailed. This is where things began to turn tragic for my family, the Dennis family. My great-grandfather, Jim Dennis, was rounded up by the posse and shot and killed on sight. Their reasoning was because they said that he had basically resisted arrest. He was shot and killed right at his home, not given a chance to even tell his story. He was murdered in cold blood. Bert and Mary Dennis, my great uncle and great aunt, were rounded up and taken to jail. On August 18th, 1916, a mob took them to jail and took them out to what I call as that tree. That tree sits in Newberry, Florida, at Newberry Lane and 235. The mob, the angry mob, took and hung each one of them, one by one. And as I imagine in my mind, the horse would come up and they would put them on the horse and put the rope around their neck and in an angry, violent manner slap the horse on the butt. And the horse would take off, leaving them to hang. One by one, they hang until their death. The tree is gone, but the memories still linger there in the city of Newberry. A city where I was educated, high school, a city where I had become an athlete, the city where the history books won't even tell what happened on those fateful days, Newberry, Florida. This is kind of riveting to me, to think that this story would surround the life of a hog or the theft of a hog. But to me, it's more than that. You see, that would actually lead to what I call the loss of many lives. And it will also lead me to believe that it was a swine story. In my own imagination, I kind of did some research of what swine really mean. Cambridge Dictionary defines swine as a person whom is extremely unpleasant and unkind. Google defines swine as pig, a police, but yet the Bible tells a different version. Leviticus 11:27 says that God forbade Moses and his followers to eat swine because it was unclean. So to believe that my relatives were killed by a pig in honor of the pig, that is the fact. Swine is from the people that their life was taken out of our family historical tree. Newberry Lane and 235 will never be the same for me, as there are times that I drive by that site and I think to myself, this is the very place that my great-grandfather lost his life. Jim Dennis, the husband of my great-grandmother, Julia Dennis, her brother-in-law, Bert Dennis, sister-in-law, Mary Dennis, all who were innocent people, righteous people, died. I cannot imagine seeing their bodies just flowing back and forth in the wind of the trees. That tree, that oak tree, I can only think of, was it hot that day? Was it cold that day? Did the Florida buzzards peck at their skin? Did they get to say a final prayer? Did that prayer go something like this? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for the Lord is with me. I don't know, but I know it wasn't justice. I know today this atrocity has stained my family and the city of Newberry. There will never be any justice for the innocent people that was murdered. Jim Dennis, Bert Dennis, Mary Dennis, Stella Long, Andrew McHenry, and Reverend Josh Baskins, all of whom by today's standard for any incident like this would serve probation and move on with their lives. The crowd from miles around came to see as their body hangs in this tree, in that tree. These people will seemingly walk away after their visual like nothing had ever happened and go on back to business as it was, just usual business the next day. My heart is full every time I think of my grandmother having to live without her father and myself not being able to speak with my great-grandfather at times. This really enrages me, thinking of all the possibilities that life had to offer, but they were taken away. My grandmother still have the memories of this incident. She'll be 102 in a couple months. With no one ever being brought to justice, this horrendous crime continues to pass us by. Something that continues to give me thought. Every day I think of, why is it that the state of Florida acknowledges the Dudley Farm as a historical marker, but not acknowledge what happened at the Dudley Farm? I also wonder, why is it that the Alachua County school system won't teach this valuable history in their history books? Yeah, I've been out of school for a long time. Newberry High School is where I was educated. But not one book will tell you about this incident. But when you talk to the citizens of Newberry, they want to talk about it. And I think we should. Perhaps in the future, a generation like mine will demand that these incidents be recognized in the history of Newberry. Perhaps a reenactment or a documentary with true historical moments. These moments in time will take us from that tree to the cemetery, to the history books. This incident, I would like to see the accountability held in the history books.
Hi, I'm Carl Smart, Assistant County Manager for Alachua County, and I want to thank you for viewing this storytelling event today. And a special thank you to Mrs. Evelyn Fox, Miss Ariel Lane, and Mr. Warren Lee for sharing their remarkable stories with all of us. We have certainly been touched and inspired by your personal insight into some horrific incidents of our community's distant and not so distant past. We wish you continued strength, courage, and tenacity in your efforts toward racial justice and equality. It was Winston Churchill who once said, "Those who fail to learn from their history are doomed to repeat it." So these stories represent yet another opportunity for us to learn from our history. The Alachua County Remembrance Project has partnered with EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, to commemorate lynchings and racial terror that occurred in this county, primarily during the post-Reconstruction era of 1877 to 1950. The Remembrance Project is working with various community leaders and their subcommittees to sponsor programs and events that will document some of the injustices of the past, as well as stimulate healthy, constructive discussions on racial justice and equality. Please watch for a couple of these events being planned for the month of February: a soil collection ceremony commemorating the lynching of the Newberry Six on February 5th, 2021, and a historical marker ceremony in Gainesville later that month. You can find details on the county's website under the heading of Truth and Reconciliation, and soon on social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. Again, thank you all for joining in this wonderful storytelling experience.